Welcome to the Genius Talk podcast. I'm your host Atul Raj from the bestemailmarketer.com, and today we have Jim Salvucci with us. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Atul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, for our listeners who don't know you, can you tell them who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, I'll tell you who I used to be. I'm a recovering academic. So I spent 30 years in higher education as a professor, and then I was a dean, and then I was a provost, vice president at a couple different universities. And I left all that wonderfulness in 2020 to go out on my own, and I decided to become an entrepreneur. While I was doing that, I learned a lot about leadership. I started studying leadership, treating it as a discipline. And I left higher ed and thought, what does I like to do best? And one of the best things I loved about being an academic administrator was I got to work with young people and help them become better leaders. So I decided to do that for a living. That was my favorite thing to do. So I've become a coach, and I coach people to become better leaders. I'm a consultant, and primarily though, I'm a writer. I have a book out. It just came out in May. I have a blog and podcast that I write every week. I was just working on it minutes ago. And I also am a speaker, and I do a lot of speaking, and I actually have a TEDx that I did in May.
That's great. Okay, so you said you normally help young people, okay? Right? So,
Mostly.
so is that different from helping older guys?
Yeah. I
How
mean, it's
much?
usually young people. It's not exclusively by any means, but I like to work with people who aren't in the highest positions. I like to work with middle managers, people on their way up, or people who are just looking to move into leadership when I'm coaching. And the reason I like that is because they haven't been ruined yet. And I have hope of turning them into really great leaders. I make a distinction between leaders and bosses. And we often talk about bosses as leaders. And I argue that bosses are never leaders. If you're a boss, if you're a manager who acts like a boss, you're not doing a good job. You need to act like a leader. You can be a manager and act like a leader. That's fine. And you can have a boss title. That's fine. But that doesn't make you a true leader. On the other hand, you can have plenty of leaders who are never bosses, who will never be bosses. And that's I think a very important distinction to make.
Okay. So, what's the biggest leadership challenge you see most founders and executives struggle with today, and how do you help them overcome it?
Yeah, the biggest struggle is they don't know that distinction between leaders and bosses. So they think once they get the title, they're a leader, and therefore they're done. Very far from it. So when I've led my whole life. For whatever reason, I just ended up in leadership positions since I was a little kid when I was in Boy Scouts. When I was 18, I had employees. I was a boss, right? So I've just done it my whole life. I've always ended up in leadership positions, even when I don't want to. Okay, for whatever reason. And so nothing special about me, just how it happened. But when I became a dean, I was a professor and I became a dean, I suddenly was in charge of a school. In fact, I was made a founding dean. So it was a new school. It hadn't existed within my university, and I had to create it. And I thought, well, I've been a leader. I can do this. And as soon as I got into it, I realized, well, I've been a gut leader. I've worked off of instinct. And I think I did pretty good. I have pretty good instincts. But that wasn't enough. The stakes were way too high. And I needed to up my game. I needed to become a better leader. And I looked to my bosses, and it was the provost and the president of the university, and they were bosses. They weren't leaders. They were horrible. They weren't mentoring me. They weren't helping me at all. And I didn't like their example. I looked at my peers. They were flailing around, my fellow deans. They didn't know what they were doing. I imitated them for a while. I didn't like that. So I decided I needed to do something very, very different. And so I started studying leadership as a discipline. I started thinking about leadership as something I could train myself in, a skill I can learn and keep learning. I started reading, going to conferences, going to trainings, getting to know people, learn from them. And so by doing that, I learned a lot about leadership, but I also learned how to lead. You can learn about something, and it's not necessarily mean you know how to do it. So I was putting it into practice, which was fantastic. And that's what people need to do when they become, managers, when they get into those positions. All too often, this is answering your question, all too often, they move into those positions. They don't really have the training, or if they have the training, they don't know how to apply it because a lot of the trainings aren't very good.
Yeah.
And so then they move in this position and they find themselves doing what their bosses did before them, even though they hated it. They hated what their bosses did. They knew it didn't work. They knew it was ineffective. They knew it made everyone miserable and lowered productivity, but they fall right into that same habit because that's all they know. So my goal is to help people understand there's a better way to lead, and that part of that is passing on what they learn as leaders. That's key. Leaders build
Mhm.
legacy, right? So
Yeah.
and the earlier on you do it, the more you think about it early on, the better you are. Think about how you're helping other people become great leaders. Then they learn how to become a leader from you, and then they pass it on. And ideally, that'll just spread and eventually we'll eliminate all bad bosses in the world and everyone will be leaders and we'll be happy. And that'll be
Yeah.
utopia.
You emphasize mission based leadership and singular focus. So, can your story where a renewed focus on mission transform an organization or a team?
Yes. um, Mission is has to do with values, right? The values of the individuals need to sync with the values of the organization. So if you belong to an organization that is, trying to, let's say it's an NGO or a nonprofit, as we call them here, where you're supposed to be you know, helping people in the community. If you're not committed to helping people in the community, you shouldn't be at that organization. And that's true of every company. Well, if you're selling insurance and you don't really believe in what you're selling, you shouldn't be there. So every organization has a mission, whether they realize it or not, and it reflects their values, and the individuals should have the same values, roughly. Now, when I was in university, it's very clear we had missions, right? We had a mission statement, and the individual faculty members were not focused on that mission statement by and large. And it's not through any fault of their own. It's just the way it is with faculty. When you go through that, when you become a PhD, you become a doctor in a subject. I was a doctor of English, right? If you become I'm studying literature. When you study something that intensively, it's very, very narrow focused. I wrote a very narrow focused dissertation. All my research was very narrow focused. All my teaching was fairly narrow focused. I was trained in that to be very narrow, and I was rewarded for being narrow. You don't get tenure unless you're very narrow. So, you don't get promotions, you don't get pay increases unless you're very narrow. So, everything about being a faculty member is about the little picture. And when I became a dean and a provost, I had to get the faculty thinking about the big picture. And what I did was I used the mission. And I got them to think about the mission of the institution and the mission of our particular unit and how we interacted with that, how that reflected our values as a group. And by doing that, they were able to see much more of the big picture and see how they fit in it. And that gave them a completely different perspective. And they became much more effective faculty members. And they also became wonderful colleagues because they really understood how things interacted and how to work together.
You have a book, okay? So, can you talk about your book?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about my book. Came out in May. It's called Greater Than Great, and it is a series of essays. There's 30 essays in there. They're all based on my blog post, and there are different aspects of how to learn about leadership. The title comes from the introduction, which was actually the eulogy for my father that I gave. And it was about how my father was a really great leader, but he didn't have a great title. He was just a good man, right? And he applied his goodness as a leader. He was a union leader and a community leader. So he applied his goodness to his leadership. And by being good, he was greater than a lot of people with great titles. And that's where the title comes from of my book, Greater Than Great. So these people have these high positions who are big deal, big politicians, big businessmen. A lot of them are lousy leaders. A lot of them,
Mhm.
most of
Yeah.
them, frankly, are lousy, lousy leaders. Here's my father. He's a humble man. He's the head of a union local in Philadelphia.
Mhm.
And, you know, but he's able to take his inner goodness and do great things. And so much of the book is about that idea of about how you need to be inside in order to be a great leader. Plus, there's other things about leadership strategy and whatnot, but you can't execute, and this is key, you can't execute a leadership strategy effectively unless you work on yourself first. All leadership comes from this self. You have to be self-aware. Self-awareness involves also knowing how other people see you. How,
Mhm.
again, self-awareness has to do with your behavior. There's no such a thing as being good deep down inside. If you're acting like a jerk, I don't care what your intent is, you're a jerk. right? If you're acting like a good person, you're a good person. That's how it works. So leaders need to understand that they need to work on themselves first before they can apply all those wonderful leadership strategies that you read about, many of which aren't so wonderful. That's a whole nother thing. So that is what the book is about. Different ways of looking at leadership and how to be a
Okay, okay.
better leader.
Okay. I'm not an expert in leadership, but I think if someone is a leader, they should be a type of person that everyone should will respect automatically.
It doesn't always work that way. I mean, I moved on. I had top positions at universities. I came to a new university. Often the people there had been burned by my predecessors. So I was immediately disrespected just by virtue of being in a position and they didn't know me, right? So having the high title actually worked against me. So I had to win them over. So what did I do? I was myself. And that was key. I was true to my values and who I was. When I got to a new university, what I did was I met with every single faculty member in their office for a half an hour. And the agenda for our conversation was me saying to them, so what's going on? And having a conversation. And whatever happened after that was fine. It didn't matter if they wanted to talk about what's going on at home, what was going on at work. I didn't care. I learned so much about them. And I learned so much about myself and how they perceived me. And that gave me the edge. Then they started respecting me, right? Because they saw me for who I was and they realized we had a lot of shared values. It doesn't
Mhm.
automatically happen. And it's not always a natural thing.
So, in your coaching, how do you help leaders rediscover their why and when they lost their direction or motivation?
Yeah, again, it goes back to those mission and values. Why are you there, right? If you're not synced with your organization in terms of your values, who you are, the kind of person you want to be, you probably need to move on. You need to find another why somewhere else. But in terms of why did you start working at this organization? What were you trying to achieve? Where do you want to go from here? That helps people discover their why. It's very, very important. Daniel Pink has a book called Drive, and he talks about how you need to give people autonomy as well as some sort of goal or vision to work on, as well as a challenge, and that will motivate them. You can do that for yourself as well. So I help teach people how to do that for themselves to help drive themselves and rediscover that why.
You know what? I saw my sister was reading that book, Drive.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you thought it was
So
about cars.
I didn't thought about anything. I was like, reading a book, good.
That's
Okay,
good.
so during tough times when things aren't going well, what mindset or techniques do you teach leaders to stay resilient and effective?
Yeah, backing up, looking at that big picture, thinking about your why, thinking about your values, who you are. I mean, we all go through this. I go through this. We all have tough times where you just think nothing's ever going to get better again. Everything's temporary. The good, the bad, the bland are all temporary. Everything is only for a time. So how do you navigate that? How do you convince yourself or how do you convince others that whatever they're facing is going to go away? And a big part of that is giving them that inspiration, that motivation to move forward, to feel like they belong in a situation. I've coached a number of people who felt like they didn't belong in their organizations,
Mhm.
that they weren't considered valuable or they weren't considered someone who contributes. And a lot of that's mindset. And so we work on their mindset. And it can be as simple as just, you feel like I don't belong. That is your negative paradigm. Well, we'll give you a positive belief that's limiting, give you a positive belief that'll go beyond those limits. And the positive beliefs can be as simple as I do belong. And then we explore how they do belong. And
Yeah.
just by doing that over time, they
Mhm.
start thinking that they belong. They feel that they belong.
By the way, to change paradigm or belief system, like we need reasons. Okay, okay. So when you help them of find reasons, you just ask questions. I think that is the way.
Yeah, I mean, asking a lot of questions. I mean, a lot of my coaching is that, my consulting's that way as well, learning as much as you can and getting them to learn as you go along. A lot of it is figuring out people's values and helping them figure it out because people don't think about that enough. I
Yeah.
don't believe in those values lists where there's 100 words on a page, and you narrow it down to 20, then you narrow it down to 10, and you narrow it down to 5 and say, those are your values. That doesn't really mean anything. Your values are reflected in your behavior. What do you find important? That manifests in how you act, right? And if you're acting in a way that doesn't feel right, then you need to adjust that. If you're acting in a way that you think this is correct, well, there's some value behind that. So, how do you act at work? How do you act at home? The nexus of those, the combination of those, the things you do at work that you also do at home, that probably reflects your values, and you explore that. From there, it's pretty easy to get to altering behaviors, right? And that's where the question comes, is figuring out the values. Once people figure out their values, they can alter their behaviors and their paradigms, because they figure out what's really important to them. Sometimes if they don't feel like they belong, the exploration ends up with, well, they don't want to belong because they don't like this organization, and that's fine. That
Yeah.
might be the conclusion. Great. Okay. But other times they don't feel like they belong because they're trying to achieve something that doesn't
Mhm.
fit with their values.
Yeah. Okay, so for our listeners who want to know more about you and want to get your help, then where can they go?
Well, they can go to my website. My company is Guidance for Greatness. That's all one word, guidanceforgreatness.com. Another great source is to go to my Substack, which is a blog and podcast. I write an essay every week and I read it aloud. Some people like to read, some people like to listen. And that's at Jim Salvucci, all one word, .substack.com. And then you can also check out my book on Amazon, Greater Than Great. It is available in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle version. And I'm going to come out with a spoken word version pretty soon. So I'll get that covered. Or you can even check out my TEDx talk for TEDx Clarkstown. It's called Swizzle, the Way of the Change Agent. And it's all about how people can make positive change in their communities.
Hmm. That's great. Okay, so is there anything else that you would like to share?
Yeah, buy my book. Yeah, no, I hope people do reach out. I love talking with people and learning about what they do and how they can do it better. So please do.
Awesome. Okay, Jim, thank you so much for spending some time with us. It was
Okay,
really
Atul.
awesome chatting with
Thank
you.
you, Atul. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.